You're listening to The Jacob Valk Show. He's breaking down the latest and greatest in sports as only he can. Follow him on Twitter at RealJacobValk. Here he is, Jacob Valk.
Hello, sports fans! Welcome to a special April Fool's Day edition of the Jacob Valk Show. I am Jacob Valk, and I know that no one is in a joking mood right now with the coronavirus pandemic, so I'm not gonna say any funny jokes. I'll save that for the outro. At least I hope you think they're funny jokes. I think they're kind of funny. No Sid Finch articles today, no left-handed whoppers, nothing. You will get the trifecta today, along with my interview with Wayne Stewart about his book on the 1960 Pittsburgh Pirates. Had a really, really fun time talking to him. He is the kind of guy who I would love to watch a baseball game with. I could talk baseball with him for 3.5 hours easily. Before I get to the trifecta, though, I want to touch on a very minor NFL signing. It's not a world beater, and certainly this team made more impressive signings earlier this offseason, but I just want to touch on it very briefly. It's the Browns signing Adrian Clayborn to a 2-year deal worth $7 million max, and I think it's a great move. The Browns' front seven is really in flux. You have no idea how Myles Garrett is going to come back from the suspension. Larry Ogunjobi didn't set the world on fire last year. Sheldon Richardson had a great year, and so did Olivier Vernon. But you also have the linebacker positions to think about. Sione Takitaki looked good in limited time. If you want to have him start, I can understand it. But Mack Wilson isn't the world beater, and as it stands right now, one of their other starting linebackers is a guy by the name of Willie Harvey. I'll be honest with you, I've never heard of him. So if you wanted to slide Vernon to outside linebacker, like he played with the Giants, and put Clayborn in on the defensive line, I have no complaints with that. Clayborn has been a really good player all throughout his NFL career. I remember when he came out of Iowa in 2011 in that draft that was stacked with defensive line talent. You know how stacked that draft was in terms of defensive linemen? Muhammad Wilkerson, who was once one of the best defensive linemen in the NFL, lasted all the way to 30 for the Jets. And then the next pick, Cameron Hayward. Both former Pro Bowlers. Cameron Jordan, 24. That's a pretty good draft. Hell, J.J. Watt. J.J. Watt fell out of the top 10 for the Texans to take him at 11. And it was funny, that was the first mock draft I ever did. And I had Watt slipping, I remember this, to 17. You know who picked 17th overall in that draft? The New England Patriots. Could you imagine J.J. Watt on the New England Patriots? Oh, I'm so glad the Texans took him. The bottom line is, great move for the Browns in locking up Clayborn. The contract is very reasonable. He'll help shore up that front seven that's really in flux right now. And whether he starts or is just a rotational player for him, he'll be really, really good. Alright, I'm going to start the trifecta with numbers 13 through 16 on my 2020 NFL Draft Big Board. They are C.J. Henderson, Andrew Thomas, Justin Herbert, and Henry Ruggs III. I'll start with Henderson, and this is a guy who I've spoken about before. I think he'd be a perfect Jet. He's really the perfect cornerback prospect, except when it comes to run support. He is, without question, one of the worst tackling cornerbacks I've ever seen. But you know what? Darrelle Revis wasn't a good tackler. Quite frankly, I don't want my cornerbacks to be good tacklers. If my cornerbacks are getting a lot of tackles, that means they're allowing the catch and then bringing the receiver to the ground. I don't like that. Cornerbacks should not have flashy stats. The only stat that they should have a lot of is interceptions and pass breakups. And even then, the best cornerbacks don't even get the ball thrown to them. Henderson has the talent to be a shutdown corner from day one. He's not getting enough buzz. I'm really impressed with him whenever I watch him play. He's the guy who I want the Jets to take at 11, and I will be very happy to watch him in green for the next 15 years. Andrew Thomas is really interesting. Very early on in this process, he was viewed as either the best or second best offensive lineman in this draft. But he got overtaken for a couple reasons. The first is that Becton and Wills really wowed people with their athleticism. And the second one is that Thomas really didn't improve his run blocking, and his footwork didn't take the jump that everyone thought he would. I'll start with the first one. That's the age-old debate, and there's no right answer to it. Would you rather take a guy, high ceiling, low floor, or low ceiling, high floor? If you ask 100 different people in the NFL, you'll get 50 saying high ceiling, low floor, and 50 saying high floor, low ceiling. And when it comes to offensive linemen, I've said this before, I would rather take the safe guy. But the reason why I have Thomas so low is because I have Thomas's run blocking and footwork at just a C. If it was even a B minus, he'd be the second best offensive lineman in this draft behind only Wirfs. Thomas didn't do enough to elevate his stock when guys like Becton and Wills were wowing people with their athleticism. If you wanted to tell me that you'd rather have Andrew Thomas, you think you can work on his run blocking and his footwork, that's certainly fine. You can make that argument. And certainly Becton and Wills have a lot more room for failure. But the athleticism is just what pushes them over the edge for me. I think we're living in an era where offensive linemen are more athletic than ever, and that's what I'm basing my evaluation on. That's why I'm putting Becton and Wills ahead of Thomas. I like Andrew Thomas. I like Thomas a lot. but he's the fourth best offensive lineman in this draft. Justin Herbert, I've spoken about at length before. I'm not going to go too far in depth on him. I think he's destined to be an LA Charger. I understand that I have him 15, and the Chargers are picking at 6. You want to tell me that's too big a reach? I mean, I'll listen to you. I don't necessarily agree with it. See, the thing is, quarterback-needy teams reach. Daniel Jones being the perfect example. I don't care what anyone tells you. Daniel Jones was not worthy of the 6th overall pick. We can argue about whether he's going to be a great NFL quarterback or not. I'm sure it's something that Eric and I are going to talk about later today, and you'll hear it tomorrow. Very excited to talk to him. Haven't spoken to him in a while. But the simple fact is, he shouldn't have been taken 6th overall. He was not worthy of that pick. The reason why the Giants took him was because they were desperate for a quarterback of the future. Quarterback-needy teams reach. It's just that simple. And Herbert's a guy who, look, can you put him in week 1 and he's immediately going to set the world on fire? No, but he'll certainly hold his own. I think he'll get better as the year progresses. And also, the Chargers have Tyrod Taylor, a guy who's proven that he can start in this league and at least hold his own. You want to tell me he had a bad ending with the Cleveland Browns? Perfectly fine. He did. I'm with you there. I was watching that Thursday night game. I was elated when the Jets made him look terrible. And then Baker Mayfield comes in and ends the winless streak. Still ticked off about that game. I don't care if Baker Mayfield becomes the best quarterback in Browns history. No excuse for a rookie quarterback to come in his first game in the bright lights and lead his team to victory. Not against my team. No. That's unacceptable to me. But Taylor has shown what he can do with the Bills. You can't count on him to be a world beater. No question. And you can't count on him to lead your team into the playoffs. I'm with you there. But you can count on him to at least hold his own and not embarrass himself until you're ready to put Justin Herbert in. And Herbert's a guy who has the talent to come in and, at worst, look competent. Not look great, but certainly look competent. And as the year progresses, he'll get better. I like Justin Herbert a lot. I think the Chargers are set up very well for the future if they take him. Henry Ruggs III is really, really fascinating to me. This is a guy who was really an afterthought at Alabama. I mean, Jerry Jeudy was the guy who was getting all the attention, and then Ruggs just blows up the combine. This guy ran a 4.27 40, jumped 42 inches at the vertical jump, and at the broad jump, he jumped 131 inches. His athleticism is off the charts. You know who he reminds me of a lot? Rashad Perriman. And I'm not talking Baltimore Ravens Rashad Perriman. End of last season Rashad Perriman. He has that type of talent. That type of athleticism. He's not going to be a great player. I don't think he'll ever be great. And he's a guy who I think can slip in this draft. I have him 16. It wouldn't surprise me if he fell out of the top 20. Again, this is a wide receiver heavy draft. Ruggs is just an athletic phenomenon. if you want to pass on him and fill another hole, when you don't prioritize athleticism, you can find a guy later in this draft. That's perfectly fine. I don't mind teams using that logic. Running back, too, is the same way. DeAndre Swift is a very talented back. So is J.K. Dobbins. So is Jonathan Taylor. You know what? Wouldn't surprise me if they fell out of the first round entirely. Swift would surprise me a little bit, but Taylor and Dobbins certainly could. Boy, I'll tell you, it's going to be really, really fun to watch what these teams do on April 23rd. Some people saying that the draft should be postponed. You know, I understand that there are more important things going on right now than sports, but I feel like we need that distraction. I feel like the draft is the kind of thing that can be done while following social distancing protocols. You want to tell me you're depriving the players of their chance to go on stage, pose with the jersey, and hug the commissioner? You know what? Let them go to the rookie symposium. Goodell can be there, and they can do it that way. I understand it's not the same thing, but that's the best they're going to get. I don't mind the draft happening. I really, really don't. Alright, it is time for this day in sports history. A lot of good birthdays today, and sadly a lot of people who died on this day in sports history, but none better than Bo Schembechler, who was born on this day in 1929. I think it's important to discuss Schembechler because when you hear people talk about a Michigan man and bringing Michigan back to the glory days, they mean back to the days of Schembechler. When the Wolverines went out and signed Jim Harbaugh, they wanted Harbaugh to be the next Schembechler. I think it's very important to talk about what he did at Michigan. Before I get into that, though, I do want to talk a little bit about his time at Miami of Ohio. He actually started his coaching career there in 1963. He played college football there. He was an offensive tackle from 1948 to 1950 and was actually pretty good. And it's funny, you know who one of his coaches was at Miami of Ohio? Woody Hayes. Woody Hayes, before he went to OSU, went to Miami of Ohio. And it's funny, the cradle of coaches. Just take a look at all the coaches to coach at Miami of Ohio before they took the next step in their career. Weeb Eubank, Ara Parsegian, Woody Hayes, Bo Schembechler, John Harbaugh, Sean McVay. It's crazy what Miami of Ohio has been able to do. But Schembechler played under Woody Hayes there. And then after that, Schembechler started as an assistant coach, bounced around a little bit, and ended back up with the Redskins. Miami of Ohio was called the Redskins until 1996 when they changed their name to the Redhawks. Schembechler was never a great coach for Miami of Ohio, but he was good. They never finished with a losing record. They won a pair of MAC titles and finished second in the conference 3 times. He got a lot of attention there. He interviewed at Wisconsin, didn't get the job. And then he decided the year after that to take an interview at the University of Michigan. It took Don Canham 15 minutes to realize that this was the guy who was going to lead Michigan into the future. Now, if you know your college football history, you should know that Woody Hayes was at OSU in 1969. And back then, the rivalry existed, but it wasn't very competitive. Around 1969, Michigan just wasn't that good. OSU was great, and they steamrolled Michigan constantly. In 1968, Hayes ran up the score against them. Schembechler knew it, and he used it to motivate the Wolverines in 69. That 1969 game is, without question, one of the greatest college football games of all time. Before that game, OSU was hailed as one of, if not the best college football teams of all time. They had numerous all Big Ten players and All-Americans, including guys like Rex Kern, Jim Otis, John Brockington, Jan White, Bruce Jankowski, Jim Stillwagon, and Jack Tatum. Kern, Otis, and Tatum actually finished in the top 10 of Heisman voting in 69. Michigan should have had no reason to even be in that game, let alone win it. But Michigan stormed out to a 24-12 lead at the half, and after that, they didn't allow a point. Granted, they didn't score, but if you're ahead at the half, you don't need to score. All you need to do is stop the other team from scoring. And Michigan won 24-12. That really started the 10-year war, which were 10 fantastic games between Michigan and OSU. Well, 9 fantastic games. 1976, Michigan shut out OSU 22-0. Not important. Back then, both of those teams were so dominant that the Big Ten was called the Big 2, Little 8. The drop-off in talent was so noticeable. It was unreal. If someone were to ever write a book about those 10 games, I'd love to talk to them about it. Or even just put them all on a Blu-ray set or a DVD set. I'd love to watch them. I've only read about them. I've never watched them. I don't think anyone's ever written a book about them. Maybe I'll write a book about it. I mean, I have nothing else to do. Staying at home. Maybe I'll write a book about it. No. You don't want me writing. I'll tell you that. Used to be a writer. Not as good of a writer as I am a talker. I'll fast forward a little bit to 1980. Schembechler never won a bowl game up to that point. It's funny, he started at Michigan, like I said, in 69, and he had went 11 seasons without winning a bowl game. His teams were great. Some of them were conference champions. But they never won a bowl game. Fast forward to 1980. Schembechler's 6th Rose Bowl appearance. And on the backs of guys like Anthony Carter and Butch Woolfolk, Schembechler finally won his first Rose Bowl by beating Washington by a score of 23-6. That really started a shift in Schembechler's offensive philosophy. He had always been a run-first guy, but with a guy like Carter as his best offensive player, he knew that he had to pass the ball a little bit more. And he recruited Jim Harbaugh, and Michigan dominated in the 1980s. They always made a bowl game. Granted, the bowl game record isn't that good, 5-5, but if you're making a bowl game every year, you're doing something right. And we all know how great Jim Harbaugh was at Michigan. He does have a complicated legacy, though. 5-12 in bowl games was Schembechler. That's really not that good. I'll tell you, if Jim Harbaugh lasts for 21 years at his alma mater like Schembechler did, and he goes 5-12 in bowl games, that's going to be seen as a failure. And this is a guy who, when he was athletic director at Michigan, wasn't that good. Fired Bill Frieder, replaced him with Steve Fisher. Steve Fisher is a very good college basketball coach, but not a great one. I could have won the 1989 tournament with that team. That wasn't Steve Fisher's team, that was Bill Frieder's team. Fisher recruited the Fab Five, but they never won a title. Schembechler was president of the Detroit Tigers when he left Michigan entirely. Bo Schembechler knew nothing about baseball. The guy forced Ernie Harwell out of town. My point in bringing this up is Michigan is blinded by the nostalgia of Schembechler. But this guy had his flaws. And if you go chasing the myth of Schembechler, with those who stay will be champions, which is a great quote, by the way. One of the best quotes of all time. But if you go chasing that myth, you're doomed to fail. Schembechler was imperfect, just as Jim Harbaugh is imperfect. Now, I like Harbaugh, but he's been a disappointment in Michigan. There's no question. He's never beaten OSU, for goodness sake. You have one job at Michigan. Beat OSU. If you only finish with one win in a season at Michigan, if that one win is against OSU, all is forgiven. Michigan should stop chasing the myth of Schembechler and start over. Bring in a guy from the outside. This notion that only Michigan men can lead Michigan is not true. Bo Schembechler was a former OSU assistant coach, for goodness sake. I mean, you'd take Ryan Day as your head coach at Michigan, wouldn't you? You'd take Urban Meyer, wouldn't you? Bring in a guy from the outside to rejigger this program. You've tried the quote-unquote Michigan way. It hasn't worked. Alright, it's time for another Mount Rushmore. You know, I actually didn't plan this. I just realized it. I'm on the Detroit Tigers now, and University of Michigan, Detroit, Bo Schembechler, former president of the Tigers. I did not plan that. That's a pretty good coincidence there. I like that. This Mount Rushmore was pretty easy. The correct one is Ty Cobb, Al Kaline, Charlie Gehringer, and Mickey Lowich. If you need me to tell you about Cobb and Kaline, shame on you. Charlie Gehringer, if you want to know more about him, listen to the January 21st episode of this show. I did a This Day in Sports History on him. The only part of this Mount Rushmore that's up for debate is Lowich or Denny McLain. And was McLain more dominant than Lowich? The answer is yes. But McLain only spent 8 years in Detroit. He got hurt. retired at 28, not even with the Tigers. He finished his career with the Atlanta Braves. It went Tigers, Senators, Athletics, Braves for him. Loesch spent 13 years with the Tigers. Now, granted, he finished his career with the Mets and Padres, but the point is, 13 is more than 8. And when you spend 5 more years with a team, you're going to have a more impressive career for him. McLean was more dominant. If you're looking at dominance, then fine. Put McLean over Loesch. I don't mind that. But if you're looking at total body of work for their career as a Detroit Tiger, Loesch is the answer. All right, here's my interview with Wayne Stewart. You're listening to the Jacob Valk Show. I am Jacob Valk, and I'm joined now by an old friend of the show in Wayne Stewart. I'm talking about his book, 1960, When the Pittsburgh Pirates Had Him All the Way with Him. Wayne, how are you?
I'm doing fine. Good talking to you again.
Yeah, my pleasure. So, what can you tell us about Danny Murtaugh?
Well, Murtaugh was the kind of manager, according to all the players I interviewed, and I was lucky because I actually started this idea of doing the book as a magazine article years and years ago. I think it might have been when they were celebrating their 40th anniversary of the 1960 World Championship, and now it's up to 60 years. But I was lucky enough to speak to almost every living Pittsburgh Pirate, and they universally told me that Murtaugh was a low-key kind of a guy. He, in fact, at one point had a rocking chair in his in the clubhouse as he got older, and it was just kind of emblematic of the kind of guy he was, laid back. When he had to tell you something, he would do so. When he had to correct you or scold or whatever, reprimand. But the players said that he was always the kind of guy that would pull you aside and do that in private, which was maybe not exactly rare back then, but certainly back then the managers were more volatile or more in your face than they tend to be nowadays.
Yeah, you didn't want to get on Casey Stengel's bad side. He'd light you up. So, can you lay out some things that we don't know about Roberto Clemente?
Well, there's only one thing, and it's slightly negative. I don't want people to get the wrong impression.
No, excellent man.
Yeah, several players, Vernon Law in particular, said that he didn't like the fact that Clemente was too concerned, I guess maybe is the way to put it, about finishing 8th place in the MVP voting for the regular season. Vernon Law thought, that you should just take care of yourself and your team and not worry about individual honors. But that said, Vernon Law, so there's no misunderstanding, and many other Pirates made it very clear that he was a very good teammate, especially as he got settled in and more of a veteran. And by the time the 1971 series comes along, he's the leader of the clubhouse. He's an elder statesman. So again, not to give the wrong impression, but that was one thing that came out about him being concerned. And let's face it, 8th place in the voting is something to get a little upset about that year, because the Pirates, of course, win the pennant, and very often a MVP winner comes from the pennant-winning team. So Clemente had some pride, and nothing wrong with that, to want to get the respect he deserved.
Yeah, I'd have gotten upset if I was him. I don't mind players being motivated by individual accomplishments, just as long as they realize that the team comes first. If you get a lot of hits, you get a lot of home runs, you get a lot of RBIs, that's great and all, but they can't be empty hits. They can't be empty home runs. They can't be empty RBIs. They have to help the team when it needs it. I'm sure you'd agree with that.
Oh, sure. And, the thing is, a lot of times, like you're saying, a player might come through, but not in a meaningful situation. I just think that
Alex Rodriguez did that all the time for the Yankees.
Yeah, exactly. Yep, good point.
Yeah, thank you. Would you be able to describe the career of Roy Faith?
Well, sure. When he was in New Orleans in the minor leagues, and Joe Brown, the general manager of later with the Pirates, with the 60 Pirates, is when Faith developed his forkball. and that was the key to his success. I think he had seen Joe Page throwing it, and I guess Face knew I have to come up with some kind of a pitch. He was a diminutive guy, so he wasn't going to blow the ball by people necessarily, although Billy Wagner was a short guy and he threw hard. But the point is, Face had to develop something. He did, comes up with a forkball comparable to a split finger nowadays, I guess you'd have to say. And because of that, he suddenly blossoms into a very important cog in the Pirate machine that year. I mean, he was nicknamed by Bob Prince, the colorful announcer, the Baron of the Bullpen. And without him, I don't think there's any way the Pirates win that pennant.
I'm with you there. Talking to Wayne Stewart, the author of 1960, when the Pittsburgh Pirates had him all the way. So, what can you tell us about Bob Friend?
Bob Friend had come off a terrible 1959 season. I can't remember the details, excuse me, but the Pirates did not do well in 59. I think there were several players, at least, big-name guys, who took salary cuts or, virtually no raise whatsoever. So Face, I guess, was determined to do the job in 60, and he did. I always kind of, as a kid growing up, considered him to be a pretty famous pitcher, pretty big name. Excuse me. And yet, when I did the first professional writing I ever did, I was intrigued by the fact that some guys who are big names are career losers. I remember Claude Osteen, the day I read in the paper that he had suddenly lifted his, not suddenly, but he had lifted his one-loss percentage to 500 for his career, and I'm thinking, this guy wasn't at 500 before this? So I dug around, did some research, came up with names like, I think it was Bobo Newsom, and Bob Friend was one of them. Friend, for his career, had a losing record, but then again, he was straddled with a terrible Pirate team through part of the 50s, and no, just the bottom line, he was very important when it came down to it in 60.
Yeah, no question about that. And even though I'm a guy who still looks at wins and losses, and I do value them, they are not the be-all, end-all. They do mean a lot to me, but, it's not the be-all, end-all. So, can you lay out the career of Dick Groat?
Well, sure. The same story holds true there. That Dick Groat had a fine career. I mean, he was an All-American standout at Duke as a basketball player, but he also took his team, Duke, to the College World Series. And then he signs with the Pirates, and a short time later, I forget exactly how long, he's in a big league uniform. And from there, of course, his career steadily grows. And in 1960, he does capture the MVP. I remember asking him, I was able to interview Groat among other people, and he was telling me that when he played in the 64 World Series, when he was traded to the Cardinals, a trade that killed him because he was a Pittsburgher, not only as a native, but at heart, just a deep part of him. I remember asking him which World Series meant more to him. It had to be 1960, and he's like, well, not necessarily. So there was a little bit of, I don't know if you'd call it bitterness, but certainly he was unhappy that the Pirates didn't get rid of him.
Hey, I'd be upset too if I was traded by my hometown team. I don't blame him for being upset there.
Sure.
You brought up Vern Law a little earlier. I'd like you to go a little more in depth on him if you can. Would you be able to describe his career?
Yeah, the one thing I have to say off the top is that when I spoke to him on the phone, and I believe he was 88 years old when I first interviewed him, we went on, and you could tell a lot of these old-time players just relish talking about the past and their careers and their comrades. And Law was one of them. And got to the point after about an hour 15, I said, you want to take a break or I can call you back another day? No, let's chat some more. At about the 2-hour mark, same thing. And we must have spoken for 2 hours, 15 minutes or something. But the irony for him is that he was actually injured the day the Pirates clinched the pennant. There was a celebration on the bus. Guys are like tearing off the other guys' neckties and throwing their hats around and fooling around like that on the bus to the airport. And I believe it was Gino Cimoli grabs the leg of Vernon Law trying to pull his shoes off. And he hurt himself on that occasion, gutted his way through the World Series, did a nice job. but he said that his career was not the same again for like 4 or 5 years after that. But certainly 1960, you win the Cy Young Award, and you take your team, as he did, to the point where he almost won 3 games in the World Series. That's something.
When you look at the list of Cy Young winners, you see Vern Law's name. At first, it may make you do a double take, but then when you look into it, yeah, you know what? This guy was a really good pitcher and deserved the Cy Young. And my father met Vern Law. He was a really nice guy to him, and my father has a Cy Young autograph piece that he got Vern Law to sign it. So I know that he's really proud about that. Talking to Wayne Stewart, the author of 1960, when the Pittsburgh Pirates had him all the way. So I've talked highly enough about my father enough. Now I'm going to talk down to him. He thinks that Bill Mazeroski should be in the Hall of Fame. Wayne, please tell me you don't think Bill Mazeroski should be in the Hall of Fame.
As much as I'd like to say yes, I have to agree with you.
Thank you.
You
Can you adopt me?
What's that?
Can you adopt me?
Oh yeah, I'll tell you. I have a stat about the Yankees later that you'll feel very good about as well. But as far as Maz goes, he did not get any serious consideration until, if I recall, somebody got on the committee, the veterans, we used to call it the Old Timers Committee, I don't know, I don't think it was a Ralph Kiner, but a guy that had a connection with Maz. And, give him all the credit in the world, but my standards are real high for the Hall of Fame. A buddy and I went through the list of Hall of Famers, and there were tons of them on the Veterans Committee that got in that way that we just said, he does not belong. I mean, no disrespect to you Yankees, but, I don't think, and New York fans, but there were some guys like Rizzuto and guys who just think, no, if we really hold the standard and make it a real Hall of Fame, you have to be a no-brainer. You have to be a Hank Aaron, these guys.
See, now Rizzuto is in because of the World Series, though. That's the thing.
Sure.
I mean, my dad for Mazeroski, and we've had this argument a million times because we love to go Hall of Faming. My father brings up the fact that he was a great fielding second baseman, without question, the best fielding second baseman of his era and one of the best of all time. And I can't argue with that, but fielding alone shouldn't get you into the Hall of Fame. There have been countless great fielders throughout the history of baseball that just should not be in the Hall of Fame. Lou Whitaker was an excellent fielding second baseman, should not be in the Hall of Fame. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that to me, to be a Hall of Famer, you have to be almost 5-tool, maybe 4-tool. And, a guy like Maz just falls a little bit short.
I'm with you there. So, can you lay out the career of Hal Smith?
I really enjoyed talking to Hal Smith, and I was sad to see that he passed away recently. The guy had a really good sense of humor. He was pretty much a journeyman. I think he was with Houston, I think Kansas City Athletics. I can't remember all the teams, but he was a joy to talk to, and he was just a kind of a guy that, I would ask him a question. He was in his 80s, too, and if he didn't know the answer, he'd say things like, well, my memory's not as good as it used to be. I took too many foul tips off my head or something along those. The key to his career was that home run he hits in the 8th inning. That is a big part of the 5-run inning that the Pirates put on the board to come back against the Yankees. And, without that home run, there's no Bill Mazeroski fame as far as that game goes. And without that home run, with that home run, had it stood up and the Yankees don't score in the 9th, Hal Smith is the hero. He's the one everybody talks about. One of his friends once asked him, sort of like baiting him as a little joke, he said, "Do you still think about that home run?" And Smith kind of deadpans and says, "Yeah, I think about it once in a while."
Now, I know that you're a trivia buff. I have a pretty good trivia question for you about Mazeroski's home run. Are you ready?
Yeah, I'll try it.
Okay. What was the pitch that Ralph Terry threw that Mazeroski hit out of the park?
It reminds me of a joke Dizzy Dean was being broadcasting a game with Pee Wee Reese, and after about the 4th inning, Reese turns to Dean and he says, what's he thrown out there? And Dean says, well, I've been watching him pretty long now, and I believe that's a baseball. Smart aleck answer is it was a baseball that Terry threw. But the weird thing is Terry claims it was a slider, and Maz has sworn all these years that it was a fastball.
Johnny Blanchard said that it was a slider, too. You got it right. Johnny Blanchard said in an interview with the Yes Network that it was a slider that didn't slide, and Terry just hung it, and he got the GOAT label. So enough about that. One of the darkest moments in Yankee history. No, go ahead.
I was going to bring up a point that ties in with your excellent point. Apparently, it had to be a slider that didn't slide or break because that's the way Maz perceived it. And Blanchard, according to what I heard, after the first pitch came in and it was high, which Maz loved, Blanchard called timeout and says to Terry, bring it down. Now, Terry told me in an interview that the mound in the bullpen was high and it was throwing him off, and I think it was a high bullpen, but it was a bullpen mound that messed him up, and when he came in the game, he couldn't adjust, and his pitches would not come down, even though he had been admonished by Blanchard to bring the next pitch down. Second pitch, it's home run, and that's it.
Yeah, and look, some pitchers have difficulty transitioning from the bullpen mound to the pitcher's mound. It's not an excuse, and look, all due respect to Ralph Terry. He had a respectable career, nothing to be ashamed of, but he's like Ralph Branca in that respect. Just a really good pitcher that, gets the GOAT label. Him and Mitch Williams, too, I feel like is in that same group. Would you agree with that?
Well, sure. The nice thing about talking to Terry, he made no excuses. I didn't even want to bring up the subject of the home run, but we did eventually.
Well, you got to have to.
Yeah, of course. But he didn't skirt the issue, and the nice thing I felt good was the fact that he comes back, what was it, 2 years later, I think it was, and gets the MVP of the World Series when McCovey hits that ball that Richardson snags.
Right. Yeah, that's right. He did win 62 World Series MVP. You're right. I forgot about that. All right. So back to the 60 Pirates. Would you be able to describe the career of Dick Stewart?
Oh, sure. He was notorious for his horrendous glove. He had nicknames like the man with the iron glove. When he was with Boston, they called him the Boston Strangler. But most of the people that I knew of called him Dr. Strangeglove. There was a good story that I'm trying to remember who told me. It was Steve Blass. I talked to him, and he said that any time a ball was hit in the air to the right side of the diamond, the first thing Stewart would do would shout out to Mazeroski, "Plenty of room, Bill. Take it, Bill. You got it. You didn't want any part of the ball." And it tied in with what Elroy Face told me, that when he'd come into the game and he'd look over to Stewart would be saying, like, "Don't throw it over here." He wanted no part of a ball under almost any circumstances.
The opposite of Mazeroski.
Yeah. The most famous story about Stewart probably is the one time they said there was a hot dog wrapper that blew across the field. The story goes that Stewart snags it, and the audience cries out like, "Ole, fantastic fielding play."
I've never heard that before. That's hysterical. Talking to Wayne Stewart, the author of 1960, when the Pittsburgh Pirates had him all the way. And, Wayne, I'll get you out on this. What can you tell us about Bill Verdon?
Well, Verdon was very steady, very dependable. They tell me before he had to wear glasses that he was actually a better hitter than, he became known as, I guess. If I recall, he won the Rookie of the Year over Hank Aaron in 54, that would have been. And a lot of Yankee fans, of course, remember as the manager there. But
right.
The one thing is, I talked to people like Bobby Richardson, and I said, was Verdon comparable to Mickey Mantle defensively? And, of course, Richardson at first maybe didn't hear the word defensively and thought it was a stupid question. But then I said, well, I heard that he was in the same league with Mantle defensively. Richardson would say Mantle, and I think most people would. But the point is, he wasn't going to embarrass you out there. And, in fact, a couple of National Leaguers compared him with Mays.
Hey, look, Bill Verdon had a good career. No question about that. Very underrated. Bill Verdon is also the answer to a trivia question, the only manager in Yankees history to never manage at Yankee Stadium. So, Wayne, you can impress your friends with that.
Yeah, I've heard that about the year they renovated Yankee Stadium. Yeah.
2 years they were at Chase Stadium.
Yeah. The Yankees win those scores 16-3, 10-0, 12-0, and I know you're a Yankee fan, so that hurts that they lose the series. But I looked up one thing, and it was, I'm sure you're aware of this, but in theory, when you play the best team in the National League, in theory, you're going to win 50% of your games. Now,
right.
Mickey Mantle sobbed over this defeat, saying that, it's 1 year that he knew they should have won, and he won so often. But, to the Yankees' credit, instead of playing 500 ball or thereabouts in the World Series, they played 675 baseball over their 40 World Series. To win 27 and only lose 13 is staggering, but that one did, Mickey Mantle said, that one did hurt a lot.
I think that if you talk to a lot of really knowledgeable Yankees fans, that 2001 and 2003 really sticks in their craw as losing to inferior teams. I mean, all you have to do is look at the run differential. The Pirates only scored 27 runs in that World Series. The Yankees scored 55. They more than doubled up the Pirates in terms of total runs scored in the series. How did they lose that World Series?
You look at the other stats, I have them here. They out-hit them 338 to 256. They outslugged the Pirates 911 to 656.
Oh.
10 to 4, and like you said, the 55 to 27 margin is staggering. But it's just one of those weird. To me, it's the most lopsided Wild World Series ever.
No question about that. All right, Wayne, you're the best. Thank you for your time.
Well, thank you, and take care.
All right, that was Wayne Stewart. His book is 1960, When the Pittsburgh Pirates Had 'Em All the Way. Thanks for listening. Here comes the outro.
Thanks for the plug, Jacob from the past. It does mean a lot. Tomorrow, you're going to get my chat with Eric Fischetti about the Giants. Going to be a lot of fun. If any of my other friends are listening, if you want to talk about one of your teams, I don't care which one it is. It doesn't even have to be football. It could be any sport. Let's talk about it. Having said that, though, I do have a lot to give, even if I don't have interviews or conversations with my friends to air. I like doing the trifecta. I think it's really fun. I think it's a good way to put out content. I hope you agree. I hope you have a good night. Stay safe. Stay inside. And until tomorrow, I am Jacob Valk saying, Veni, Vidi, Vici.